There we go.
Great.
Well, it's certainly a privilege and a pleasure to meet with you this morning. And I don't know how formal we want to make this, but I know that you do a lot with the emotion and the voice. And I love the title of your book that, sing without thinking, because as soon as we think, it kind of interferes with everything else we're doing. I totally get that. Um, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I fell in love with singing when I was a kid. It was the way that I felt like I would be visible to the world. I felt very invisible. I'm one of five, and I was the middle child,
Okay.
so very busy mom and busy dad with other kids, and I was one of those kids that thought I should be the only one.
I think kids often think that way.
Yeah, I agree. I had a very strong Oedipal complex. I was very like enamored with my mom, and she was busy with four other kids, and so when I figured out that I could make beautiful sounds with my voice that would get people's attention, I think I devised a plan that I was just gonna sing a lot so that I would become noticed.
Right.
And then I looked at Ricky Martin. I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and he was huge when I was in my early teens. And I was like, I want to be noticed as much as that guy's being noticed. And so then I kind of started to emulate the way he sang. And I was hoping that maybe walking down the street at one day, someone would, hear me and be like, I'm going to sign you to my record label. So I tried singing out in the street for years, hoping someone would discover me, and it never happened.
Oh, it didn't happen?
So then I was driving this old Volvo, and that my first car I bought after saving up some money, and a commercial for a college for performance and singing and acting came on, and I said, well, no one's discovered me yet, so I might as well go to this college, and they'll just teach me how to be Ricky Martin. And so I went
Okay.
there, and then I graduated, and still I had no idea how to do it. So one thing led to another, and I became a singing teacher, and now I'm working with those kids that want to be, known and seen through their singing. And it's really fun. I feel like it's a better fit for me because I did a couple of tours in the country singing and acting, and I found that I don't like traveling, and it's very hard to be, a pop star when you don't like to travel. I like being put in one
Mhm.
place. So yeah.
Well, and if you're on a tour, you've got to be ready to just sit around and wait and hurry up and wait and wait and wait. And
Very isolating. And then I noticed, like, yeah, I'm getting standing ovations and a lot of applause, but still no one knows who Gabriel is. They just know, who the characters I was playing was.
right.
So still feeling invisible.
Well, that word isolating is a really powerful thing because as much as performing artists want connection, like you said, if you're on tour, you're not going to have a lot of connections other than your immediate tour group, which sometimes that can become really a family in a positive or negative way kind of experience. Um, but no, I think that's great that you've been able to
Sounds
find your
like you
niche.
sounds like you know what you're talking about there. I had a negative family experience. It's little talked about, and I'm hesitant to say it in public, but I think it's becoming more acceptable to be transparent. So what happened was I was the leading man, and the rest of the cast did not seem quite thrilled with the fact that I was getting most of the attention. Because as I
Hmm.
said, they were the kids that wanted to get all the attention. I was getting all the attention. So there's like the sibling rivalry thing. And they were brutal, 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 brutal. They would hide my costumes. They would leave me stranded in places from the tour bus. It was awful. So it
That
was,
is really, wow. That's just mean and malicious.
yeah, yeah. And I once saw there used to be a show, I think it was on MTV, I forgot what it was. And Christina Aguilera said there that she was out in the club with two friends, and when her first song came on, they left the club because they got very like jealous or envious. And I remember retroactively remembering that story when that happened to me, and I was like, "Oh my God! I thought this industry was all about like love and being celebrated and being seen." And then I found out this is not at all. I'm not saying every experience that everybody has is like that, but
Hmm.
I'm saying that was my experience, and it was just bad enough to like just give me a very sour taste. So I just, yeah.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. And so let me tell you a bit about myself.
Yes, please.
So I grew up in a musical family. I was one of five, but I was the youngest. So everything should be for me, right? I still run into that every once in a while.
I
And
bet you
my
did.
mom was really quite the community musician. I grew up in Logan, Utah, and she was involved at Utah State University and in the community. And that meant as a family, we were always doing things. I mean, she taught piano lessons, she taught voice lessons. So there was always something musical going on. My brother played the trumpet, the sister the violin, the piano. So there was always music going on. And we were doing lots of different programs in the community. And so I just grew up with music as a thing that was part of my life. And all through junior high and high school, I did everything I could with music. Had a vocal scholarship to Utah State University and got a bachelor's degree in psychology. And I joke about how my mom was a musician, my dad was a psychologist. And so when they got together, here I am.
Yeah, there you
And
are.
so I got a bachelor's in psychology and went on to get a master's degree in counseling at Brigham Young University. And I was working on my master's degree. And I thought, I miss singing. So I went and auditioned for the choir for my second year of my master's program. And I was able to perform with their premier choir, which was just a delight, a privilege. What a treat. And not only was it a great musical experience, that's where I made this connection like, wait a minute, all the stuff I'm learning over here in the counseling department was the stuff I needed as a young musician growing up, the stuff that had made a huge difference. And that famous line of just practice more, take a deep breath, um, you know, practice more, that just didn't cut it.
No,
And I mean, how often does a performer really go into a setting unprepared? That's really rare.
I agree. And you mentioned appreciating my quotes. I think that's what I'm trying to fill in. The philosophical mindset stuff that is not just technical.
Right.
It's not just about practice more and like learn all this stuff. And yeah, but I appreciate your awareness of how, being one of five and being the baby shapes kind of the rest of your life. The
Oh yeah.
wiring is just there. I've been working so hard to like get rid of all that conditioning, and you know what? Spoiler alert to those younger than me, it doesn't go away.
Well, I can say that at 64. I'll often talk about the old school approach to performing is that sense of practice, practice more, and hope, and at the same time worry. Like that's just how it was formulated.
Yeah,
And there was always somebody there that could do it if you couldn't.
yeah.
And so that competition of somebody being better than, or kind of that cutthroat component to it, that it
It's
can be very real.
a recipe for anxiety, right? It's
Oh,
just, it's a competition. There's not enough resources. Somebody's always there to get the part. This is finite. There won't be any other opportunities. This will make or break your career. And I think that all that pressure that mounts inside a person, and it's all lies, there's always going to be other opportunities. You could
yep.
always be the lead next time if that's what you want and are meant for. And by meant for, I don't mean it in a esoteric, magical thinking way. I'm very averse to that. I mean, if you're wired for it, if you have the kind of temperament and goods to do
Hmm.
that, and perhaps if you're not, getting the being the star and being the lead, maybe you're better off not. Maybe what you're doing, wherever you're doing it, is where you're needed. Because I know this is cliche, but they say there are no small roles, only small actors.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of true. Sometimes the supporting actor is just as powerful, and I wish that my former co-stars, not to make this a therapy session with you, I wish they would have had some awareness that, they were supporting me, I was supporting them, and they were just as beloved. And, it's not uncommon. I was in Beauty and the Beast. I was the Beast. So
Okay.
everybody wanted to talk to the Beast and get, an autograph and a picture with the Beast. They didn't want to go to anybody else. So, that was very hard for me because I have this kind of survivor's guilt or something as a performer that was very difficult for me, where it's like, share the love, people, like go to the other actors and get in line for them so they can feel like loved and seen. But I couldn't control it, and sadly they were resenting me for it. I feel like such an a-hole talking about this like that. But I think, it's one of those like, feel sorry for me. I'm so handsome, talented, and smart. That's not what I'm trying to say. But there is an
Mhm.
experience that is legitimate for the person that seems like they have everything and it's always, rainbows and unicorns. Or
Yeah.
we all struggle. It's hard for all of us.
Well, I remember actually in high school talking to a kid and he goes, John, you sing so well and it comes so easy for you too. And I was like, like
Insulting.
it was insulting. It was
I
really,
agree. Yeah, people tell me that kind of stuff all the time. Like, you're so talented, you're so gifted, you're so blessed, you're so lucky. God gave you this gift. And I mean, it's very insulting at this point.
Mhm.
I've worked really, really hard, and that's one of the new kind of pivots I'm doing with my quotes is like trying to tell people, like, listen, being a lawyer and being a doctor seem a lot harder than being a skilled singer, but being a skilled singer is just as difficult.
Oh,
It takes the same amount of dedication, effort, focus, passion, study, just practice. It
yeah,
takes all of it. And so when people just act like it's just like, oh, people on Broadway are so talented. No, they are working their butts off. And also, sorry to be on my high horse here, they're not making a lot of money. Um,
right.
so stop thinking that, this is so glamorous and glitzy.
Well, the other challenge that I see too is you start to, especially with young performers. So, that's one of my key emphasis right now. If people have already made it, they've got whatever they need to be out there performing, they're not going to call me. They're not going to
Right,
like work with me.
right.
But, I see that about three-quarters of the people that are performing could really, if not all of them, could really benefit from the kinds of stuff I do because it's like so skill oriented. So I got my master's degree and found this, and sports psychology was just emerging. And so then it was like, oh, I'm going to take this and run with it. I got my doctoral degree in clinical psychology. My dissertation was on the experience of peak performance with musicians. So this is something I've been really into and researching and working with for the longest time. And then as I kind of did my tour from Utah to Illinois to Arizona back to Utah, um, I've taught a class which I think ought to be required for every musician called the Psychology of Music Performance. So here's like 30 hours of instruction on how to get yourself mentally ready and musically ready and prepare for those performances and manage them so they can really manage those performances because they're not all going to be great and
You
we got to learn how to
probably
manage
don't.
it.
You probably don't hear this a lot, but to take it to the personal level, congratulations on all that work and study you've done. I know you've busted your behind, and again, to keep drilling kind of my point here, a lot of times someone that reaches your level of expertise and study and all of that, people assume that you don't need to hear that or that you just walk around knowing how amazing you are, right? But people think that about me all the time, and
Yeah.
I rarely get compliments and validation. And it's not that you or I are thirsty for it, but it sure is nice to hear, isn't it? To
Hmm.
be seen and to be validated for the amount of like love and passion and work and effort instead of just like, wow, you're so amazing. And now I think you and I, because we worked our asses off, to be frank, we can help those that are on the path. And like
Yeah.
you said, sometimes they find the success they're looking for, and then we kind of put ourselves out of business many times. And I'm happy when that happens. I especially love it when they stay in a relationship with me, even if it's not as regular, because
Hmm.
there's nothing like having that person to keep going back to,
Yeah.
that long-term relationship, like a kind of like a marriage, it's like where you've been seeing the same doctor for 20 years, same voice teacher, same coach for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not that you're going as regularly as you do maybe when you're learning, but that you stay. I think there's something beautiful about that long-term commitment, which I think is losing its popularity, I guess you would say, in society, where people is just like they're hopping around from like window shopping, facilitators and experts and coaches and things like that.
Well, I think you're describing a lot of people who are looking for that magic answer.
Right.
And as soon as they discover that guru doesn't have the magic answer, it's like, I got to find another guru.
Yeah,
And um,
that's right.
so it's a challenge to be able to say, okay, how do we stay in this process? I can say as a psychologist, there's lots of times where I'd watch people get right on the edge of what their anxiety was all about, and then boom, they were gone. And
So true.
the courageous to say, I'm on the edge, it's like, keep guiding me through this, keep guiding me through this.
Yeah.
And that is
And
the privilege.
we call it sabotage, we call it fear of success. Sometimes people say fear of failure. There's all these terms, imposter syndrome, I don't deserve this or this or that. Call it whatever you want, but you got to get through that. And the way you get through that is by sticking to something and not jumping ship. And you're a psychologist, so I'm sure you're familiar with attachment theory. And
Oh, yes.
yeah, so there's this fear of intimacy. There's this great intimacy that builds when you're about to have a breakthrough. And the intimacy can happen on multiple levels. Like it can happen with your voice teacher. And I'm not talking obviously about romantic or sexual intimacy. I'm talking about a more of a, I guess you would say, a professional intimacy or a being seen
Yeah,
intimacy.
a person to person, just kind of like, hey, we are safe here. I mean, if you think of intimacy as a word that says safety, we can only be as intimate as we feel safe.
Have you heard it? Into me, you see.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's like you're about to be seen, whether it's by that one voice teacher or that one performance coach or that, million people in the audience or whatever it is. That's frightening for most of us. It's very exposing. And when we start to feel that anxiety and that fear, it's that whole thing of like careful what you wish for because you might get it. People want to sing without thinking, like the title of my book is, or people want to perform for thousands of people, but when they find themselves close, what I think a lot of us call performance anxiety or stage fright is that I call it a fear of intimacy. I don't know if that's unique to me, but
Hmm.
that's what I think it is. You're about to be fully seen, and
Yeah.
that's frightening.
Well, it really can be. And again,
It
um,
can be, yes.
I was talking with somebody this last week who has her doctoral degree in piano performance. And I put together an assessment, and this is kind of drawing on my clinical psychology background. And it was just so interesting to look at all these questions that I had there. And I said, guess what? Underneath each of these questions and your response is a skill. Now, what that's telling me, if you have a positive response to this question, you've got a skill that's working for you. If you have a negative response to this question, you've got a skill that you need to develop. And it was so eye opening for her as she was looking at this, like, you mean that's a skill? Like, that's a skill? There's a skill for that? Um, as she was trying to figure out how to manage her own anxiety in a performance setting.
It's kind of sad, right? That we have to point people to what their skills are and that they overlook them because no one has seen them and no one has like named it and no one has validated it. I think it's just our culture has a lot of dismissive, superstitious, magical, like not owning kind of language,
Oh,
like
definitely.
yeah, and I think when we don't make it dismissive and we make it, connected, and we don't make it magical, we make it more like tangible and kind of like merit based because we're just afraid to take credit for almost anything. I think this culture, the Dominican Republic, self deprecation was maybe 80% less than what I see here when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. But here, people, Dominican person will take a compliment, even if to somebody else, it's like, why are you taking that compliment? You don't deserve it. Like you could say, your body looks fantastic, and maybe they haven't even like done any work to get the compliment, and they'll be like, thank you. They're so quick to accept compliments. So that cultural kind of contrast of me living there and coming here for vacation and someone saying, your hair looks very nice. And it's like, oh, my hair's dirty, or things like that. Or, I mean, I'm afraid to compliment women because they usually bat the compliment back somehow.
Hmm.
And I'm afraid to compliment people here because I like when I give something for it to be received, right?
Hmm.
And then people usually find a way to deflect. So I appreciate when I told you, like, I see all the work you put in, great job. And you were like, oh, this old thing, we have that self-deprecating kind of thing in our culture. And then we don't get to absorb not only praise, but also like be able to see like, wow, this is a skill I have. Or
Hmm.
something like, wow, this is a weakness I have that I can actually strengthen if I apply myself. Somehow, for some reason, that's not obvious to us. It's very like only for other people, only other people can be great.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You're a psychologist. What do you think that's about? And why do you think that is?
It's interesting because, I'm thinking of different cultures and different groups from New York, whether it's the perfectionism in the performing arts, and it's like, if it's not absolutely perfect, I can't claim it as good enough.
Right.
And so
Which is
again,
a which is a load of hogwash, and
oh, painful,
yeah,
very,
it's
very deprecating,
ridiculous.
very, 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 very painful. And that sense of like, hey, I thank you very much. I enjoyed being able to share this with you tonight,
Yeah.
and to be able to genuinely say that. And it's like, oh, I'm glad you enjoyed that. And because I work with a lot of students in that 18 to 25 range, and boy, getting them to just accept a compliment. But I really think it's based on this sense of, well, when it's really perfect and I know it's as good as it should be, then I can accept that compliment.
Well, it is as good as it should be, and it probably is perfect for their skill level and their age group. The thing is, these kids are comparing themselves to people that have been in the business for, 20, 30, 40 years.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's a perception flaw there because, when I was 18 to 25, I was comparing myself to 40-year-old Broadway stars. And I
Hmm.
know then they've been in the business since they were like seven. So like it was such an unfair comparison. So I think that when we bring that context and that perspective in, we can be more realistic about why it is that those people are so amazing and why we have such a long way to go. But I've been listening to old recordings of mine, and I have to tell you, John, I was so much more skilled and so much better than I remember thinking that I was at the time. It's
Hmm.
kind of like when you were very fit in your 20s and you thought you were fat, and then you look at the pictures and you're like, I'd give anything to look that way. That's how I feel. I'm listening to my recordings, songs I wrote and recordings I made and performances I had when I was in my, late teens, early 20s, and I was like, oh, it's pretty good. But back then, I thought I sucked, and I didn't. It was just that I was comparing myself to, the superstars, and that's
Well, and when your context is, I've got to practice more, this was a classic story. After class, this young lady says, Dr. Skidmore, can I talk to you? I'm like, sure, let's talk for a minute. And she had a recital on Saturday, and it wasn't like the senior recital. It wasn't a big deal. It was just kind of like a class assignment recital kind of thing. And I'm talking to her, and she was so entrenched in this, I've got to practice more, I got to practice more. And she goes, yeah, I'm going to be practicing Friday night. I even turned down a date. And I go, what? You turned down a date? And I literally said, okay, as soon as we're done, you call that young man back and you say, I'm available. Now, if you're not, let's go out next Friday night. And she was like, don't I need to practice more? It's like, no, you don't need to practice more. It's going to be more than good enough for this thing you started at the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. It's going to be more than good enough. Like, go out on a date, have some fun, quit worrying about how perfect it's not.
I couldn't agree with you more. You're a coach, or is that what you call yourself, a coach?
Performance psychologist right now and
Perform.
coach. Yeah.
Okay, so you're a performance psychologist after my own heart. I think had she gone to the date and enjoyed herself, that would have sweetened her performance because inspiration and connection and love. So I make posts like this, and again, not to get catty or gossipy, I recently blocked another famous voice teacher that followed me on Facebook because he just kept giving me flack about posts that I would write. Like I would say something like, "Go on that date," and trust the practice you've made so far. And he would
Hmm.
just get on my case, just destroying my logic or something. So I let him get away with that for 3 years, which is probably too long. But I finally said I can't take this anymore, so I blocked the guy. But anyway, yes, I think that people think that they need to practice more, and it would be nice if that was true because the solution would be simpler. But what
Hmm.
they need to do is much more complex than that. They need to open their hearts more, which is a lot harder, I think, than practicing more. What they need to do is get better sleep. What they need to do is, water their plants. What they need to do is get back in touch with reality so that they're not in this abstracted, like futuristic, catastrophic state where they're dissociated, frankly. What they need to do is to re regulate their nervous system and get back in their body and stop catastrophizing.
Hmm.
That's the thing. And if the solution was to practice more, then there wouldn't be any issues in the world because I mean that's easy to do.
Well, and yeah, and that's the easiest fix. If it's ever a situation where, okay, I just didn't know it, well, spend some time on it. One of my
Yeah.
favorite assignments, you'll appreciate this, in my class is a description of their worst performance ever. And these are always dramatic stories. And
Shakespearean dramas.
oh, we spend 3 weeks digging into this story, sentence by sentence, word by word. And the first thing I can almost guarantee is their trauma, the drama about this worst performance ever, is a developmental experience, like it's expected. I was using a microphone and I didn't know what to do, and the feedback thing went all wonky and was screaming. I didn't know what, and I got really nervous. And I forgot the words to my song, and it was so embarrassing. It's like, well, you're gonna have to learn how to deal with that feedback or with microphones. This is like a developmental thing. You're gonna have to do this.
Yeah.
And one guy wrote a story about accompanying a person at a solo competition and just how horrible, embarrassing it was. But as he told the story, he mentioned that her accompanist was ill and was not going to be there. And he was asked like 90 minutes before her um, recital to cover for him. So he only had like 90 minutes to practice. And here he's just beating himself up because he didn't do well. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
So I'd love to comment on the
Yeah,
beating himself up thing. One of the things that was super helpful for me, and I hope we share this video with people. I hope that's the
yeah.
intention of recording it. One of the things that I found most helpful as a person that was dealing with these things was that there's that saying, "I'm my own worst enemy," or "I beat myself up." And I had a Zen spiritual teacher that changed my life forever. I'll give her credit. Her name is Sherry Huber. She wrote a book called There Is Nothing Wrong with You. And she was the first person to introduce me to the notion that it is not me beating myself up and that it is not I that I'm my own worst enemy. That there is a absorbed system of conditioning, like this like social standard and this kind of like downloaded, learned, installed, like software in there that is constantly beating down on me. We call it the inner critic, or we
Hmm.
call it, there's many names, the inner saboteur, I think. Um, that's not us. So I like to think of it like that, and I use this with my students because if it's not me like beating me up, then I can fight back.
Hmm.
Because if it's me, then it's much harder for me. So I really appreciated that distinction, that this inner saboteur or that inner bully or that inner critic is just something I picked up along the way. I wasn't born with it. and it's
Right.
this thing going like, how do you not know how to deal with the feedback with the microphone, and you're making a fool out of yourself. It's this very like parental, like negative parent in your head, and it's not you. And I think the solution, and which I think you alluded to, is to learn the steps. You can't, being penalized or punished for something that you don't know, is just absurd. So if you don't know about feedback, or if it's an element that wasn't introduced in any of your practice sessions,
Right.
and then you're like performing and then you're dealing with feedback, of course you don't know what to do. You haven't, like, you don't know anything. You're not exposed to that kind of thing previously. So I think that's a very helpful thing. The thing of saying, like, I know it's a semantic thing, but it's like, I like that people name their inner critic. I don't know if you use that kind of technique, but
Hmm.
there are many different ways to create a little bit of distance from
Hmm.
that. I call it the asshole in my head. Um, so yeah, that's my name for it, or the voices in my head, the
Yeah.
negative voices.
Gabriel, the way I like to look at that, I like to think of it as we have a cast of characters in our head.
I like that.
Okay. And we have this cast. And just like when a director puts out a call, the best people show up, and this is their pool they choose from. They're going to select the best people they can to fill all these roles. And one of my favorite workshops, I like to refer to it as befriend the imposter, liberate the performer.
Mm.
And if
Say
you get a
more
chance,
about that. Yeah,
what's that?
say more about befriending the imposter.
Oh, there's a delightful, a powerful psychological approach called internal family systems, IFS.
I'm very familiar with it.
And when you can start to look at one of these like imposters or the critic as a protector or a manager
Right.
that just doesn't have the skills they need.
Yep.
I mean, they were trained by a 5-year-old.
Yep.
Don't ever do that again. That's bad. Stop, 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 stop. Don't do that. Oh, that's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. And to be able to look at that and say, okay, how do we start to look at this cast of our characters? Fun story where I got to run through all of my characters. My son was, I just called him Mr. Percussion at his high school. And he came home from school one night and said, Dad, tonight at the park, we've got these jazz musicians that are going to be there. They told us this is like a play along with them. We can join them up on stage. Will you go? And it's like, of course, I'm going to be there. And so here I am in the audience, and I heard a friend of mine, I knew the man up there on stage. It was almost like he said, hey guys, let's do a couple songs before we bring these young kids up because we don't get to play together very often. It was like, hey, this will be fun. And all of a sudden I heard, let's do Summertime. Now, my vocalist, my performer goes, John, you know the vocals for that. Go grab that microphone. Then the manager jumps in and says, slow down, John. You've never sung this with a band before. Do you even know all the words? Do you know what key it's going to be in? And the protector shows up and says, John, this could be embarrassing. Like, this could be really embarrassing. I mean, you weren't invited. The answer is no. And it's like, okay. And so I didn't go up there and grab that microphone, but I was
John,
aware of this conversation.
I appreciate this so much. I suspect people listening to us this far know a little bit about that, but for those that don't, I want to kind of slow it down, if you don't mind, uh, and not necessarily through the lens of IFS, in internal family systems that people can look up and learn about. I think that this parts work is becoming more, um, I believe that we're all getting so crazy and so anxious that we need, necessity is the mother of invention. So we need to kind of learn about modalities like this one
Mm-hmm.
for it to work. And I think that's why, like, movies like Inside Out, I don't know if you
I
saw.
love it.
Yeah, yeah. Came out where they like personify each emotion. And what you're saying is kind of similar. So if I'm not wrong, what you're saying is that there are these different kind of parts inside of you, these different characters,
Yeah.
cast of characters as he called it, and that when you have a performance, like, one feels super eager to go, the other one feels like, hey, slow down, be careful. And lest anybody that is not kind of aware of this way of thinking, that doesn't mean we're crazy.
Right.
Which I think a lot of people would be like, they would think it's like dissociative identity disorder, or like what they used to call multiple personalities. But in a way, in our psyches, we do. And I think when I used to talk to people about the voice in their head, they go like, "What are you talking about? I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not on
Right.
medication." But I find that, now people get it more. They go, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind, like, would you expound on that notion that there are these separate parts? You called one the protector, the manager. Would you kind of do a more a slowed down version of that?
Consider that there's 5 different types of characters. Okay. We have protectors, most obviously, and they're the ones that are definitely well trained by the time we're 5 years old. By the time we're 10 years old, we've got a whole fleet, regimen. We've got a whole group of protectors in there. They can just like, I'm going to be here at any moment. We have managers. Now, what the goal of the protector is primarily keep us safe. The managers is to make things sure things work out. Okay, how's the best way to do this? Now, sometimes managers can be very respectful, very kind, very compassionate. Other times they can just be mean and nasty.
Mm.
And then we have our performers. Now, each role we take on is a developed role. Um, when you're actually on a stage singing, you're in a different performing than you are teaching.
Right.
And so we have these different roles that we take on, from community member to employee to business owner to
Son,
all these things.
friend. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we take on these different roles, and then we have the best self. And I had this really fun workshop. It'd be great to work, do something like this with you. But the idea that we have this best self, and that's just coming directly from internal family systems. And it's like saying, okay, the best self inside of me is courageous and confident and creative. The best self inside of me is like clear in the focus. It's compassionate. My best self is connected and supported. My best self is curious. My best self is confident. Now, when I talk about confidence as a performance psychologist, I talk about I can handle whatever shows up, more so than I'm going to go out there and hit every note exactly.
Right. I
So
can
we have these,
adapt.
yeah. So we have to really mature and develop this best self. And then we also have the parts of us, the burdened inner child, the wounded, the burdened. And so, as I talk about that example in the park, it's like, okay, I've had experiences with embarrassment where I didn't know enough, where I wasn't invited. Okay. And all that showed up. And my protector saying, no, we're not doing that, was keeping me from remembering or dealing with some of those past emotions. Now, what's really fun here, Gabriel, a few months later, I was invited to a program at Disneyland called Inspiring Brilliance, and it was full of music educators. And here I am in a Disney studio with a Disney artist, grand piano. We're singing all these great Disney songs. And all of a sudden, she goes, I need a couple soloists on this next song. I had the same conversation in my head. Hey, let's do it. No, wait, like you're a psychologist who sings. They're like real musicians here. Just all this chatter, boom.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I was able to access some of that best self energy that said, well, why not? So I put my hand in the air. And so I just got to do this little itty bitty solo thing. But it's like that conversation was amazing to me because it's like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And what I'm really grateful for is everybody else was frozen up that it took so long I could process this where I could finally put my hand in the air. And I was able to do that.
Mm.
And it was just so fun to see that contrast.
Yeah, I'm a student of Zen for 12 years, and thank you for breaking it down and sharing that. I'm a student of Zen, and one of the things that we keep looking at is process and content.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have two auditions or two performances, those are different contents, but you tend to bring the same process into them. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so we call it karma. That's more, Sanskrit kind of Eastern
Mm-hmm.
philosophy way of looking at it, and we're looking to transcend the karma. So what you described is basically that the same process showed up in that Disney thing, and then once you have enough experiences with what we call disidentifying from that
Hmm.
process, then you have access to choice. And I also wanted to plug the book No Bad Parts for
Yes.
people that are more interested in learning about that subject. And also, just to like bring more depth and richness to our conversation, some people don't resonate with parts work, and like they just go, "This makes no sense. I'm just one," and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
For those people, I recommend learning about the nervous system and being regulated versus being dysregulated,
Right.
which is a little more simple for depends on how people are wired. You know, everybody learns differently. And for me, when I'm dysregulated, that's when all this drama kicks in. It's just survival, adrenaline,
Mhm.
cortisol. You know, there are many approaches to this, and for some people, the um, parts stuff doesn't resonate. But then we can also work with the body, with like somatic stuff, with our bodies being regulated, with us being present, with us. So like for that, I do Zen, and in Zen we call it being in the light room or the dark room. So when you're in the light room, you're your best self. You're basically, you know, the self with the capital S, I think they call it in
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
this work. And then when you're in the dark room, that's when this just Shakespearean internal drama, just so much emotion and stuff. Which, by the way, is also a natural phase, I think it's good that we go through that and that we overcome it because I think that builds our character and it gives us empathy and compassion for people struggling with it. Like, I'm glad that you're so candid and open about your own process because I find that so many people that do what you do can be so private about what goes on in their own process. Sometimes
Hmm.
because they're not performers, and as you said so astutely, it's not the same being the psychologist with the big hat in the room and then being the one like in the hot seat, like in the
Yeah.
spotlight. You know, and so that's why I always love. I love teachers that are performers too, that sing too, because I feel like it's easier for them to relate. And that's not to say that teachers that don't perform don't have any value, but it's just so much easier for me to kind of identify and feel seen in that process. So yeah, there's no one way of dealing with this stuff. I have a sense you're enlightened enough to know that, right?
Right. I don't have the magic answers. I know that. But
And
one thing we,
you know you're not for every client too,
right.
right?
Oh,
Because I know
absolutely.
that too. Yeah.
One thing I loved as I was looking at some of your Facebook stuff and that is your emphasis on freeing the voice. Tell me a little bit about how you approach that as a voice teacher. Someone comes in and you can see that that voice is not free. Tell me a little bit about how you do that with your students.
Well, you know, one of the first things that usually blows my students' minds is I ask them, so tell me, run me through one of your days. Like, what are you doing? So, you know, what time do you go to bed? What time do you get up? And what do you do? And a lot of them are, you know, scrolling on their phone at night, which is, you know, the 2025 disease. And then not getting enough sleep. Again, getting up early, downing a bunch of coffee, going to an office, you know, staring at a screen, typing,
Hmm.
barely talking, barely having any animated, passionate conversations. So what do you think is going to happen to that voice? It's going to go through atrophy, right? Because if you're sitting on the couch all day, you're not going to have fit legs. So if you're quiet all day, just staring at a screen, not having animated conversations, your voice is going to get atrophied. So to free that voice, the vocal exercises that we do are about incorporating more range, more
Hmm.
volume, more, you know, dynamic rhythm, different tones, volumes, pitches, so that the voice starts to get conditioned, right? Because again, if you're not you know, doing any weightlifting or picking up anything heavy, it doesn't have to be weights. Um, what's going to happen to your muscles? They're going to, you know, start to shrink and get atrophied. So your voice is not just not free, it's also just like not even being used. It's dead. Like
Hmm.
you're just saying, yeah, I sent you the email. Okay. What time? Okay. I'll see you then. You know, and that's about as much talking and range that people use. You can imagine what would happen. If you're not a performer, that's what happens. For those that are performers, if they're running into blocks, that sometimes has to do with like their enthusiasm. They're so enthusiastic that they like lock themselves up. They're like super eager to like get there. So those I need to kind of like reel in and tame down a little bit. So you can be hyperactive or hypoactive. So the hypoactive ones require a certain set of like, exercises, and the hyperactive, whichever one I mentioned, requires the opposite. And it's just about bringing balance. And balance is not about putting them in the dead center. It's about giving them range that's like sustainable, so that they're
Hmm.
not too far, in the hyper functioning or too low in the hypo functioning. And so it's just vocal exercises, and I call it babies cry and laugh. We in vocalizing, I call it a kind of a curated crying and laughing, because we use so much range, right? And so it's just learning how to call on certain sounds that are primal. That's why my book is called How to Sing Without Thinking, because when we're laughing, crying, sneezing, uh, burping, just coughing, all these things are reflexive. They're not like, let me think about how
Hmm.
high my pitch is going to be when I laugh. I hope. I hope we're not that far gone. Or, how long I'm going to laugh for. I hope people aren't managing those things. I think some people might be when they're, insecure, but my hope is to bring them back to that more primal reflexive state that they can summon on command, instead of having to run through a list of, wait, what did Gabriel say again? He told me to breathe into my diaphragm, open my throat. That's the thinking that I'm talking.
Yeah. What's interesting, well, thank you. You know, when we really look at freeing our voice, and that's something that I've actually used in my clinical practice. I had a client actually, I was just having her just say out loud, I have a voice. And she's going like, what? No, just say this. I have a voice. And just kind of going, okay, let's put a little sound to that. I have a voice. I have a voice. I have a voice, and it
Love
was
it.
really difficult for her because too many times in places in her life, her voice, she learned very quickly, I can't use my voice right now. And so to start talking about, I have a voice, like, can you make it louder? Whoa, people are going to, I have, and so I've definitely incorporated a lot of this stuff into what I do that way.
So I don't know if you read my book or not, but
I haven't yet.
oh, okay, on page 25, chapter 1 says you have a voice. So
Okay,
if you don't mind, I'm gonna just read a little bit
sure.
to tease the audience. So, regardless of what you think or how you feel about it, you have a voice, or as you would say, you have a voice. I am aware that the main concern of many singing students is whether their voice is good or not. So, to sing without thinking, the first order of business is to stop asking this question. Instead of this value judgment mindset, you want to switch to a mindset in which you see your voice as a neutral tool for expression that has a great deal of potential. Potential you can hone and make compelling choices with. So rather than using your precious attention, time, and energy to question, doubt, and put your voice down, which is really what much of this wondering is, use your attention, time, and energy to invest into and nurture the voice that you have. So, yes, I love what you're saying, because it's not just the practical using the different volumes and melodies with it, it's also an affirmation
Hmm.
of something that happens to be true. If you can speak and if you're using a voice, you have one. And you're not stuck with it in the state that it's in. It's like clay, and there's potential in it. Some of us have a lot of twigs and sticks and stones in it that we have to kind of get out. That's the blockages and stuff. But once you clean it up, then you can start to have all the fun you want with it. So yeah, that's what vocal exercises are all about. So I thought it was ironic that you were saying I have a voice, and chapter one is you have a voice. So
Yep.
right,
Oh, that is wonderful. Um, well, one thing that's really clear to me as we're talking here for the last hour, we have a lot in common.
we do.
We really do have a lot in common.
Isn't it nice? Birds of a feather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what's exciting to me is that commitment to help performers, to help singers really free that voice and to share themselves in that authentic way. And
And
um,
for me, John, sorry to cut you off.
yeah,
That's a trauma response, right? I felt like my voice was taken away from me.
hmm,
And my response, just like many activists that, are passionate about, whatever they're passionate about, usually it's connected to something personal in their history. A lot of
sure,
times they're not aware of it, but I wasn't aware of it for the first, 20 years I did this. So I just became aware of it this morning. But that's more of a joke. But I mean, like, I'm trying to give people what I felt like was taken away from me. And
right.
that infuses what I do with this like giant sense of purpose and meaning and passion. And I would imagine that I can't tell you why you do it, but I would imagine being one of five and being the small one had some kind of coloring to the way that you come at this with.
Absolutely. And I think really what it comes down to is um, I didn't have certain tools that would have made a huge difference for me.
Right.
And there were times like I wanted to be in the jazz band.
Right.
When I got nervous, I couldn't syncopate anything.
Of course
It's like,
not.
and then suddenly I get in the jazz choir, the swing choir, and it's like I was singing better than anybody else in there. So I went from that like, oh, I can't do it over here, I can do it over there.
Yeah.
Um, and we've all had those pivoting kinds of experiences.
Oh yeah.
And to be able to start to bring tools and skills on a training level to performers is a very different experience because they're not going to have a smooth journey no matter where they go. And if they can't deal with those episodes, I've got so many stories of performing artists who have quit following a performance just because they didn't have the skills to say, wow, maybe when I auditioned for my scholarship in February, I was really practiced. And then I'm playing at my high school awards assembly and I wasn't practiced. It wasn't up to speed. Oh, and it was embarrassing. It was sad.
Yeah, and
They
then
couldn't
it becomes
say,
I think what you folks call learned helplessness, right?
yeah,
Where yeah, it's not like actors auditioning and not booking anything and then quitting. It doesn't help, the financial piece sometimes. Like a
sure.
lot of people don't they need to make a living, right? And they don't have forever. When I lived with my parents, I was able to audition a lot more, but then I had to find a way to pay my bills and auditioning is expensive. You have
Yeah.
to pay for everything. Yeah, it's kind of
Well, and if you take that audition as a failure because you didn't get the role, and that's just simply how you look at it, I mean, that's just so devastating.
it is devastating, and it's also devastating that you called out of work that day, and that you like spent whatever little money you had to like get that outfit you needed, and
Hmm.
then it didn't pay off, and
Right.
then you're just like, I'm giving so much and getting so little, so screw this, and this is how a performer dies, and then becomes another something. I think it's a tragedy though because I do believe that some of us are wired to do this, and we have
Hmm.
to do this. And if we don't do it, we get ill. I think that's what's happening in the world. I think a lot of artists are having office jobs that, are just not good for them. And you can do it on the side and whatever, but this society, this culture, and this country, frankly, with it's just not really supporting the arts and the artists. So one thing I'd love to say, and I have to start wrapping up, but is that I would love if people found outlets. I love YouTube for that. And I would also love it if people didn't just blame themselves. This is not set up for supporting the artist. That's why I think what you and I do is so valued by those people that see us because it's kind of rare that you see people supporting a performer. Families are usually many times discouraging people from doing it,
Yeah.
understandably so. And the government isn't helping right now with cutting funding and stuff like that. And I'm not talking about any specific administration. It's just arts need more funding. They need more. They need more help so that we can not get discouraged so easily.
I couldn't agree with you more. One of my favorite things to do, Gabriel, is to go into a high school and to work with the orchestra or the jazz band or their choir, because the majority of those kids aren't going to show up in a psychologist's office, but every single one of them needs these tools and
They
skills.
do. They do. And it's not being taught, it's not being given, and it breaks my heart. I know there's a lot of things that break our hearts in the world, but what breaks each of our hearts is connected to our personal thing. But it breaks my heart that so many kids will never get, the coaching that you and I could provide because it's, not available to them. And that's why I love YouTube and I love what you're doing with this video, and I love doing the stuff pro bono like that because I want people to sing more, and I want people to you know I want people to sing more.
Well, metaphorically and quite real, I mean, we all have a song to sing. And when we're in our own way, when we're shutting that voice down, however we're wanting to sing, whether it's in business or within family or on a stage, we all lose. We all lose.
Yeah.
What a delight to
Same.
talk with you. I can see we have so many things in common. We're going to want to keep this conversation going.
Yes, please.
And I'm excited to see how we can do that. So let me just close with one of my favorite phrases. When I heard this, it was like, whoa, I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to put that on everything. See, what I really believe is when a performer has the mental tools and skills, they can risk, they can fail, and they're going to risk again. Because that performer says, it's worth the risk. I want to do this. And they know how to manage all those other voices that are saying, like, no, no, it's not too scary. John, you can put your hand in the air. This is fine. Okay, I'm going to do it. I put my hand in the air and I took that risk. And so that ability to be able to risk and fail and risk again. See, that's what I believe peak performers do.
I'm so glad you took the risk, and I'm so glad that we connected, and I look forward to doing this again. Thank you so much.
We'll do that again.
Okay. Take care.